Hello, guys. Mm, yeah, I don't know how to start actually, but I guess we have our evening tea, and today we are going to talk about crime and punishment. So, I finished this book. This is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I don't know what to say about this book, except for the fact that it has, I cannot say changed me, even though I want to say it, but I cannot say that because I've read it, finished it only today. So, unless I have substantial proof in favor of the argument that this book has changed me, I cannot say that. But I really think that this book has had a very profound impact on my self awareness, so to speak. Why? Because uh, I relate with the protagonist. I know it sounds very cliche and you know trying that you you relate with the protagonist who is depressed and a murderer and so on and so forth. Oh, so like I know maybe I don't know, but if someone were to come to me and say something like that, something corny like that, that oh I relate with Raskolnikov, my first instinct would be yeah, bitch, you sure do. That kind of cliche and kind of response, but I cannot help it. I mean, the thing that I relate most about Raskolnikov is his predicament, is the way he goes on about dealing with things. Not to say that I am going to take up an axe and kill the person who I think is evil, but at the same time, the kind of like when you are thinking about something and like you after a point of time you kind of lose the thread of space and time of where you are, or what was the actual thought that you started thinking about, and instead you go on this trajectory where you feel so far removed from everything you know and everything you understand, and yeah, that part of Raskolnikov, of him spending long hours in his room just lying in bed staring at the ceiling, not even you know waking up to turn the lights on, or not eating if not asked. That was a little bit extreme, yeah, but mostly the isolating part, the part where Raskolnikov isolates himself from everything and everyone, and thinks about something, comes up with a plan, and then in very meticulous detail he comes up with a plan of killing the pawnbroker. That's scary. But I do get his righteous anger at the injustice of society, and how people who are powerless are becoming even more powerless, and people who have money and who have amassed a lot of power, they continue to exploit people beneath them, and that's just the way of the world. And Raskolnikov is a law student. He is studying law in university, and he writes this article where which is about crime and something like that. But at the very end of the article, he hints at this idea that there are two kinds of people. One are the meek kind, the kind that lives in quiet servitude, that suffers and follows the law basically. And then there are these pioneering people, people who have the right and willingness to overstep the boundary of laws that are applicable to the first kind of people. And in his isolated frenzy and mania, I would say, he kind of comes to this idea that he is one of those people, and he is a big fan of Napoleon. And while I was reading the book, the first time I came across this thing that Raskolnikov is a big fan, Napoleon is Raskolnikov's hero. I was like, that has got to definitely say something about the character, because from what we understand in history, Napoleon was not that. He was an excellent journal general and great army man, and definitely a lot is said about his conquering abilities. I'm not sure how true is that, but I think there is one story where someone was saying that someone was reading Napoleon's hand, and they were like, okay, so you don't have that line in your hand or palm, which victory, the victory line is missing from your palm. So he takes out a knife and then says, okay, what does that line look like? And then he cuts himself that way. And so now he has that line in his palm. I'm not sure how true that story is, but it was something that I heard about Napoleon back when I was a kid. I think someone, probably my father, he loved, still loves telling stories. So yeah, but so I mean that says definitely a lot about Raskolnikov as a person, who your hero is. And he sees Napoleon not as someone who's doing wrong or killing people. He sees them, and in his words, as a benefactor of mankind. So if that's what Raskolnikov thinks, he is certainly bound to take some action that might not be congruent with the rest of the world. And I personally think that Raskolnikov's story is a tale of caution. Instead of him being glorified as as a hero or even as an anti hero, while we need to have empathy in our heart when reading the book and learning about the character, we also need to understand that he was deeply flawed. He was poor, he was broke, he was destitute, he had no money and no prospects. Nothing was working out for him, let's say that. But he was not dying of hunger, or he was not, like at that position where he would have to kill someone for mere sustenance. So, Raskolnikov's killing the pawnbroker and her sister Lizaveta was not for need, or not out of necessity, but out of a certain mistaken ideology. He believed himself to be the benefactor of mankind by killing someone as evil and, in his words, a louse, as the pawnbroker. And you can really see it in the chapters where he's confessing his crime, which he does not think of as a crime, very interestingly, to Sonia, who is a prostitute. And when he's confessing the crime to her, he even says he says that I know that I should not have killed her. That was wrong and stupid. But I just wanted to know whether or not I was that person. I was someone who could overstep the normal laws which are applicable to the rest of the folks. And that's it. I feel like the Raskolnikov's biggest undoing, his pride, his vanity, his internalized belief that he is better than other people, which kind of isolates him even more than he would have intended to. Razumihin is a character that has been utterly devoted to Raskolnikov from the very beginning. Even Raskolnikov is afraid, scared of his devotion. And he questions himself, how am I going to answer him, or what will he think? But the point was that even Razumihin's friendship was bitter for Raskolnikov. He thought of Razumihin as a fool initially. Later on, he was like, yeah, he's a good man, because Razumihin was obviously going to take care of his sister and his mother once he had, done what he intended to do, and the consequences were weighing up on him. Then he was like, yeah, Razumihin is a good guy and he takes responsibilities and everything. But when Razumihin was actually trying to help her, he thought of him as a fool. And when I say that, this book has had a lot of impact on me, in terms that it has taught me things about myself. What I mean is that it has taught me, without explicitly telling me, how important humility is how important friendships are, how important it is to share your thoughts to someone, a real person, not ChatGPT or not any other, you know, abyss. You can write it, yeah, sure, do write it, journal it, but also talk to a real person. Tell someone how you are feeling. Go out and touch some grass. You know, it is, some people have minds like that, that never stop questioning, that it's just driven by a why, debate, argue, understand, argue even more. That's just how some people's brains are wired. That's what I meant when I said that I related with Raskolnikov on some level. And that is why it is, I feel it is so important for people like us. And instead of, being in your own head, getting new ideas, thinking that those ideas are really revolutionary, and they could be, but it is better to share these ideas, these emotions, these experiences with someone else, a real person. Not because they will save you or they will, you know, help you come out of that rut. Sure, but how do these ideas reflect, you know, you when you say something, when you tell a story to other people, there is some, narrative resonance or dissonance that is going to happen when the other person listens to your ideas. And that is, even if they don't agree with you, it is very important for you to understand that, to take their perspective instead of making elaborate judgments about killing someone on your own. But that's also the tragedy of Raskolnikov, that he thought himself alone, even when his loved ones surrounded him, his mother who lived for him, his sister who was ready to throw her life away in the hands of a fool like Pyotr Petrovich, so that Raskolnikov could have a good life. He could, so that he could complete his studies, or and get a job, things like that. He had friends like Razumihin who like, even though he also needed the money, he was also broke. He was like, you do the German translation because you're so good at it, so that Raskolnikov could earn some money. And he could not see all that love, all the effort, because he was too much in his head. That's what I feel the real tragedy is. Of course, there is a lot of other content about behavior of people in the book. What madness is, like, there is a very interesting character called Katerina Ivanovna, who is just like her story is sad to the point that it broke something in me. Her story is just pure sad, 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 sad. I'm not going to spoil it, but you know, sorry, I almost got into thinking about her, but she has a tough life, like almost everyone else in the book. Everyone in the book is having a very tough time, but I would say that yes, her life was tougher because her husband was a drunk, and she herself was ill, and there was no money to send her kids to school. She was having bouts of cough where blood would come out of her mouth, and she had a very, not very, but a good upbringing. And so it was crazy for her to be reduced to such low station, and some things happen and then she just loses it, just completely loses her sanity. But when you would talk to her, that is, when you would hear her story, her arguments would make sense, even though she was saying things, some things, exaggerating things that were not really true, and then believing that they were true. And I think that is what mostly like meant that she has gone delirious. But her, you know, spiraling into that kind of abyss where she has no hold on reality whatsoever, that was scary to watch, read. And there are few other examples of, not in this book, not in Crime and Punishment, but I have read some other books like The Vegetarian or My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I think in The Vegetarian, the protagonist very clearly is going insane and she does not make sense. But the transition from when she was making sense to when she was not making sense was scary, because all the while you're following her thread of reasoning of, and you, like, if you listen to her you will realize that she makes a lot of sense, you know or not a lot of sense but some sense. And she's probably misguided on certain points, but it's not like her reasoning is outright wrong. And that's a very interesting aspect, because when you look at Raskolnikov's reasoning, it makes sense. It makes sense because, you know, for the better part of the book, which is to say the first half where he's going on about doing these things, I was pretty convinced that it's the right thing to do. That what he is doing, which is to say killing the pawnbroker, is bad, yes, but not completely unwarranted. But and so that's the scary part of following a crazy person's story very closely is that they make sense, some sense. There are few questions that I have from this book. That is, first one I think is, was Raskolnikov an atheist? When someone asked him, I think it was Porfiry Petrovich, who asked him whether he was um, religious, to which he said yes. But that being said, throughout the entirety of this book, he never referred to God in any of his internal monologues or dialogues with anyone. So I think only with Sonia he discussed God, and that too also felt almost mocking, that he was mocking Sonia because he made her read the raising of Lazarus. And he was going and she was giving him the cross, he was like, I'll come back for it. So he was like not really very keen on the idea of God, and sorry, and the idea that God is going to help him, or God had any role to play in it. I think there was one part, I'm not sure I'm remembering it right, where someone said that someone brought, and I think it was Sonia only who brought God into it, and then he was like, I cannot talk anymore if God is being introduced in this conversation, in this line of reasoning. So I think he was not really a believer at heart, but then but why did he then say that he was a believer when asked? Could be because, at one point he was just fond of lying. But I mean, I don't know, it's just something that is bumming me. But at the very end of the book, and this is a spoiler warning, when he's there in Siberia and he has that same copy of Bible with him, which he made Sonia read from on that day. He picks it up after he has an episode where he starts crying, and he realizes that his life has not ended yet. And it was, I think, Sonia's love, her relentless determination and devotion towards him, that she would follow him to Siberia, that did something to him. It opened his heart. I think I'm going to read that paragraph again so you can make it out for yourself. On the evening of the same day, when the barracks were locked, Raskolnikov lay on his plank bed and thought of her being Sonia. He had even fancied that day that all the convicts who had been his enemies looked at him differently. He had even entered into talk with them, and they answered him in a friendly way. He remembered that now and thought it was bound to be so. Wasn't everything now bound to be changed? He thought of her. He remembered how continually he had tormented her and wounded her heart. He remembered her pale and thin little face. But these recollections scarcely troubled him now. He knew with what infinite love he would now repay all her sufferings. And what were all the agonies of the past? Everything, even his crime, his sentence and imprisonment seemed to him now, in the first rush of feeling, an external, strange fact with which he had no concern. But he could not think for long together of anything that evening, and he could not have analyzed anything consciously. He was simply feeling. Life had stepped into the place of theory, and something quite different would work itself out in his mind. The last line is very beautiful. I've underlined this. I don't know if you can make it out. But life had stepped into the place of theory, and something quite different would work itself out in his mind. Under his under his pillow lay the New Testament. He took it up mechanically. The book belonged to Sonia. It was the one from which she had read the raising of Lazarus to him. At first, he was afraid that she would worry him about religion, would talk about the gospel and pester him with books. But to his great surprise, she had not once approached the subject and had not even offered him the testament. He had asked her for it himself not long before his illness, and she brought him the book without a word. Till now, he had not opened it. He did not open it now, but one thought passed through his mind. Can her convictions not be mine now? Her feelings, her aspirations at least. She too had been greatly agitated that day, and at night she was taken ill again. But she was so happy, and so unexpectedly happy, that she was almost frightened of her happiness. 7 years, only 7 years. At the beginning of their happiness, at some moments, they were both ready to look on those 7 years as though they were 7 days. He did not know that the new life would not be given him for nothing, that he would have to pay dearly for it, that it would cost him great striving, great suffering. And that is the beginning of a new story, the story of the gradual renewal of a man, the story of his gradual regeneration, of his passing from one world into another, of his initiation into a new unknown life. That might be the subject of a new story, but our present story is ended, and that's how the book ends. So it is crazy to think that at last Raskolnikov was changed, transformed, not by his own guilt. He never has any guilt. And those are his words, that he doesn't have any guilt. But he definitely, I think, Raskolnikov is not a very reliable narrator to begin with. So if he's telling us that he does not feel any guilt, or he's fine with killing the old woman, but then his actions, they are in quite opposition of his words. He cannot sit still. He cannot even dare to use the money that he stole. That is obviously because he is scared, and that he'll get caught or whatnot. But he is agitated all the time, even though he is out of the loop of suspicion. He is tortured by his own moral compass, even though he doesn't say it out loud, even though he does not acknowledge it. He thinks himself too smart, that I have got everyone else fooled around. But his own conscience betrays him through and through. And that's how the story ends for him. He confesses, he goes to Siberia. He is not really remorseful there, but rather pride and vanity still not left him. But he is at last moved by Sonia's devotion and dedication, and you know that even though she knows everything in and out of what he did, she still comes to meet him. She still is standing by his side. And Sonia, if you know her backstory, is the epitome of all human suffering. And it really is quite ironical to see that Sonia, on one hand, who has literally lost everything, you know, like she is in that position where she has to sell herself, her own body, so that her siblings can eat. That person is ready to forgive Raskolnikov. That person, not just forgive because Raskolnikov has not done anything to her, but that person is ready, willing to follow Raskolnikov to probably the end of the world. That should, I think that's what Raskolnikov's changes, not changes at least, but makes him give away his haughtiness, his pride, his vanity. And this has become a very long video, and I still have a lot to talk about and process and digest about this book. But I think, in short, this book, this book is a great read, and I would recommend almost everyone to read it. It's not very accessible in the sense that I it from I'm talking about from my perspective. I bought this copy in January 2022, and it has been almost 3 years, 22, 23, 24, 25 half. So it's been almost about 3.5 years. Took me 3.5 years to finish the book. I started it 3 times in between, and every time I stopped at about 50 pages or so. So I think it's not a very accessible book, and it deals with some difficult ideas. So it should be read with, like, I won't say caution, because, who am I? I'm not going to police reading. But I would say that put some thought in while reading this book. Take a moment, reflect, walk around, think about what's happening, and enjoy, really, because that's how, the book kind of becomes a thing of its own. Then it becomes more than just a book. It becomes something that stays with you, because you are going to forget the details. You are going to forget the details. You are going to forget probably the ideas that were discussed in the book, but the process, the experience, that stays with you. So that is what my suggestion is, that take your time with this book, read carefully, understand the ideas. If not, Google search, go to forums, discuss it with other people. But overall, take your time, enjoy this book, and most important than ever, have fun. So that's about it.